What I'd like to do now is open the virtual floor to questions and comments. So as I said before, you can raise your hand to ask a question virtually, or you can also put your comment in the chat. As we wait for people to sort of collect their thoughts, Professor, maybe I could abuse my position slightly and get my question in early. I was thinking, is there much, as a Christian theologian, have you come across any texts, manuscripts where the personality of Imam al-Husayn or the tragedy of Karbala has been alluded to, mentioned in any way at all? Or is this something that you just find, because you have the benefit of looking for having a hand in both traditions, actually? So what do you find in the Christian tradition versus the Islamic one?
When I was researching this last book, The Dreams of Karbala, which was specifically about angelic intervention in the life of the Prophet before the birth and before the death of Al-Husayn, predicting this. But it also contained elements of dreams that people had after Karbala, people who'd fought Hussein and helped to kill him, or people who recognized who he was. There are a number of stories, but these are, of course, Islamic texts. I don't know of any Christian texts. There are a number of Islamic texts which tell us two things. Number one, they tell us of these monks and monasteries, the carrying of the head of Al-Husayn and his companions from Karbala to Kufa and then to Damascus. There are a number of texts that tell of this group who stopped in a monastery or monasteries, and the monks recognized that this head was the head of the grandson of the Prophet and did everything they could to protect the head and to stop it being abused. There's a famous incident of this pen of iron that writes on the wall of the monastery as these soldiers who are guarding the head, as they begin to eat the food given them by the monks, this pen writes, "Does the community which killed Al-Husayn dare to think that it will receive the intercession of the Prophet on the day of Al-Hisab, the day of accounts?" But there's also a Christian ambassador from Byzantium who comes to the court of Yazid, and Yazid is in one of his partying moods, as he was, around the head of Al-Husayn. And this Christian ambassador from Byzantium begins to question him, and Yazid is quite reluctant to talk about this. He keeps saying, "Why do you want to know this?" And the Christian ambassador says, "I want to know because when I go back to Byzantium, they will ask me about your court. I want to be able to describe the great splendor I saw here. So whose head is this?" And when Yazid says it is the head of Al-Husayn, the monk says, "You mean the son of Fatima?" And then converts to Islam in a defiant act against Yazid and is killed. But it is a Christian witness, as the monks give Christian witness to the personality and the person of Hussein. These are Islamic, mostly Shi'i texts, but also some Sunni texts which portray Christians. As earlier on in Islam, the monk Bahira is portrayed as recognizing the prophetic sign of Muhammad. So these are texts in which monks and Christian leaders recognize who Al-Husayn is and what he has died for, and they take a stand for him, sometimes just to protect his head from being abused by the soldiers.
Thank you. We have a raised hand from Waji Shah. Waji, do you want to ask your question?
Thank you for that wonderful presentation. Very passionate. I just want, you answered, I had a question in mind, but you already answered it, about what started your passion into studying these figures. But then my second part of the question, when you spoke about your passion, is how did you in the first instance get to come across these sort of figures that are restricted to quote unquote Shi'ism?
Good, thank you. So when I was much younger and I was a student here in this institute studying Arabic and Islamic studies, there was a very, very short course on Shia Islam. It was hardly noticed because most of the teachers were French scholars who had studied Sunni Islam and mostly Sharia. And so that was the kind of emphasis. But we had a British professor who is still alive and living up near Birmingham, who came in and taught us Shia Islam. And I was entranced by Karbala. And I can remember thinking one day, I'm going to relook at this. So when I came to write my doctorate, I decided that I would write on a Shia subject, since it would be the first doctorate in Shia Islam in this institute. And I thought to take Al-Husayn. So I was going to write exactly what I'm doing now, a Christian perspective of Al-Husayn. But then, of course, I discovered Lady Fatima because you can't study Al-Husayn without her. And I was quite shocked that so few books existed about Lady Fatima. There were some Arabic and Farsi documents, but there was no really academic study for the Western readership of Lady Fatima based on the Arabic sources. So with great anger from my moderator, I changed my doctrine, went the other way, and I wrote what I thought was probably the first. Now, there are plenty of good books on Fatima, but I think mine was probably the first book in a Western language based on Arabic sources about the importance of Fatima within Islamic theology generally. And then after that, it was just a series of things, Lady Zainab, and then the dreams of Karbala. So my speciality seems to have become Karbala and the people around the event, before, during, and after. And so now I'm tackling Al-Abbas, because once again, Al-Abbas is hugely popular, but nobody writes about him. I mean, there's hardly anything really. There's Arabic literature, of course, but I'm thinking of a Western audience who don't read Arabic. I want to be able to produce something about the extraordinary nature of Al-Abbas and his sacrifice on the day of Karbala, because again, here you have a perfectly good model for humanity who needs to be made known. So that's kind of how it went. And when I finish this book, I am retiring from Shia Islam and from everything else, and I'm going to put my feet up and do nothing for the rest of my life.
Sounds wonderful. Let's go to Fizza next, please. Fizza, if you'd like to unmute.
Thank you, sister. Christopher, that was a lovely sermon. I really enjoyed that. I've got one question for you on a personal level. So with, pain and suffering is a universal concept. Every human faces pain and suffering. And on the day of Karbala, we see pain and suffering at its pinnacle, and the way that Imam Hussein manages that. May I ask, how is it related to being a great person? Why is pain and suffering so important for greatness of man?
Well, this is an excellent question, because it really is quite a problematic theology for many people. The truth is that one of the things that makes Shia Islam and Catholic Christianity particularly close is that we have a similar view of suffering. Now, recently, this professor who died, Mahmoud Ayub, he had, from the Shia point of view, written quite a lot about this, that we understand suffering as a thing that can do us good. In other words, it's not something to be run away from. It's unavoidable anyway. But there are many religious people who hate suffering and don't want it to be part of their lives. But Karbala in Al-Husayn, as in Christian theology, the death of Jesus, suggests to us that suffering plays quite an important role in our formation as human beings, not just because it's unavoidable, but because in a sense, suffering can refine us. I don't want to use the word redeem, although I know Islamic theologians who use this word, but in the sense that suffering can, if it's treated properly, make us better people, stronger people, less selfish people. I don't think we should go looking for suffering. That would be a very bad thing. But when suffering comes into our lives, as inevitably it does, I don't think it should be avoided. I think we should say, what can I learn from this? Because somehow this is going to do something for me. It's going to make me or break me. I want it to make me, and therefore, what sort of person am I going to be once I have been refined a little in the fires of my own suffering? And I have to be honest, most of my suffering is just a tiny bit of daily personal sorrow. It's not the suffering that countless people go through, really horrendous. As you said, Al-Husayn, and not only Al-Husayn, his family, like Lady Zainab, watching her family being killed one by one without being able to stop this. One cannot imagine the psychological trauma of that. And yet the trauma shaped Lady Zainab into an extraordinary woman of courage as she stood before the tyrants of her day. That's what suffering should do. Not something I long for and look for, but when it comes, there must be a way of embracing it and saying it's unavoidable. So how can I use this for my own good or even for the good of others? That sort of theology is quite strong in Shia Islam, I think, and in Catholicism.
Wonderful, thank you. Next, we have a question from Leila Bukhari. Would you like to unmute and ask?
Thank you for that there, Manzar. Christopher, that was an amazing amazing speech that I thoroughly enjoyed that. Now, my question is more to do with the work that you're currently doing. So I know that you mentioned that you're currently writing your book on Al-Abbas, and I think my question is what is it that draws you in to these certain personalities? Like, of course, if we look at the, if we look at the whole of the Ahlul Bayt, there's a lot of people to choose from. There's a lot of personalities to choose from. But what is it in particular that draws you into the ones that you've previously written about and the ones that you're currently writing about?
I think partly it's the question of justice. I think justice is a major issue in the world still. I'm a South African, and I grew up in a situation of massive injustice. It was not just a little issue of racism, it was extraordinary legalized injustice. So I come from a situation where I've watched people struggle for rights and for justice. And the fact is that millions of people continue to be oppressed because of their religion or because of their race or because of their culture. So I think that the issue of justice remains a primary issue in our world, because here's the truth that many people, and this is the truth that Hussein realized: you can't have peace if you don't have justice. If you don't have justice, don't talk about peace. It doesn't exist, and it's never going to exist until justice exists, because true justice leads to peace. Therefore, justice becomes a primary battle that we have to fight. And what attracts me about these people, Lady Fatima fighting for the just position of her own husband, then Al-Hassan, certainly, but also Al-Husayn fighting for the Husseinian model, if you like, against the Yazidi model that he'd inherited from his grandfather. So he knew Islam better than Yazid did. And then the Lady Zainab model, the Abbas model, these are all for me human models. Now, I say human, I'm not detracting in any way from the imama. I understand the imama and I understand isma, that quality. But Al-Husayn is still a human being, as are all the imams. They are human beings with blood like mine, and they lived in a world of injustice where they themselves were treated with great injustice. I think that all of these men and women for me are primarily models of fighting, being willing to stand for justice, no matter what the cost, not giving up and saying, oh, well, the price is too heavy. Not only justice for themselves, but justice for others as well. There's something heroic about having a perfectly comfortable life, but being willing to suffer for the sake of others. And I think that's primarily what attracts me. Now, that doesn't say that countless other members of the Ahlul Bayt didn't do the same, but my speciality is around Karbala as a central event for justice against compromise. And therefore, it's the personalities around Karbala and their own stands that attract me particularly.
Great. I saw Fizza just raised her hand very briefly. Fizza, did you want to come back in and ask another question?
I don't want to be too greedy and ask too many questions, but there's so many.
Go for it. Go for it. We've got time.
Christopher, may I ask, what do you see really quickly the similarities between Imam Hussein and Jesus Christ?
Oh, lots of similarities. No. We have to start by setting some boundaries. Al-Husayn is not Jesus and Jesus is not Al-Husayn. So we can't amalgamate the two. They're two different characters and each has his own personality. That's very clear for me, because there are some theologians who kind of amalgamate them so they just become kind of the same thing. They're not. They're very different. And the claims made about them by Christianity and by Islam are very different claims. Having said that, there are, in terms of, firstly, their mothers, and then after that, their own lives, the miraculous nature of their births, because Al-Husayn's birth is filled with miraculous actions, angelic interventions. They stand for justice and they're being killed for the sake of their stand. This brings them together enormously. So for me, Christians have, even if they were to reject Al-Husayn, Christians, and say, well, we're not actually interested in him, they already have a figure who, like Al-Husayn, has his life taken away from him, because there's a difference between giving your life and having it taken away. Al-Husayn took his stand, but he had his life taken unjustly. by a wicked people, as did Jesus. And therefore, you have these two extraordinary human beings, but also for Christianity, of course, Jesus is more, we know that, but you have these two extraordinary models of men of God who take a stand, even though it doesn't necessarily affect them. I mean, they may not necessarily need to have justice done to them, but they take a stand on behalf of others, including those who will come after them, and they have their lives taken for that. I'm very nervous of comparative theology because, you know, you could look at Lady Fatima and Mary and there are huge similarities, Al-Husayn and Jesus, but I don't want these figures to be amalgamated so that Lady Zainab or Lady Fatima loses her personality and just becomes another Maryam. She's not another Maryam. She's Fatima, and she's an individual created by God for a specific purpose. So comparative theology is good as long as we don't as long as we don't blur the boundaries. Yeah.
We also have a comment in the comment section by is it Jabal Muhammad Wabin, and he's just mentioned that the wonderful lecture reminds us of the two scriptural messages that we often either ignore or overlook from the Bible. We read from the Gospel of James 2:14-19 and the Quran, Surah Al-Asr 103:1-3. Christians and Muslims should reflect on these verses often. I don't know if you want to come in on that one. I'm not really sure which specific verses that is in the Bible. Would you like to come in? Jabal Muhammad, please unmute, or no, that's okay. Professor Clohessy.
I don't have a Bible in front of me, ashamedly. I don't, or a Quran for that matter, so I can't really comment at this stage.
Is it okay to?
Your voice is just a little bit lower, so if you could just come a bit closer.
Okay. Now, what I'm saying is that the lecturer reminds us of belief and action. In both James and Surah Al-Asr, God reminds us of our beliefs and action. Very often, we ignore these things or we overlook them. And that is where the integrity and whatever, I mean, the lecturer has expertly revealed to us now, explained to us, that is where we are. If we claim with all the claims and the screams and whatever we do in the masajid and in the churches, when we come out, our life is completely different. And I really adore this particular lecture. Thank you very much, sir.
So thank you. This is an exceptionally good point. The letter to James, the major theme of James is faith without action is dead. It's pointless having faith if that does not result in actions for good, for justice. If you claim to have faith, but your life is without any goodness, then your faith doesn't exist. And this is an excellent point because this is the whole point of Al-Husayn. His faith, his Islamic faith, his submitting himself to God is not just an academic exercise or even just a spiritual exercise. It is the whole of his life that is submitted to the point of death, so that his action for justice ties up perfectly with his faith in the Quran's call to fight against injustice. Therefore, you have a perfect integrity balance in that life. So thank you to Jabal for that. That's a very important point. Yeah.
Wonderful. And we'll just go to our last question, and then I guess Layla, you've got your hand raised. If you want to come back in, and just for your comment or question.
I think I just wanted to say that the work that you have done, Christopher, is I personally believe it's really important to kind of like it's initiating a lot of interfaith dialogue, which is quite important considering the times that we are living in at the moment, with a lot of hostility towards towards Muslim communities or even Shia communities alone. And I think I just wanted to ask is that how would you propose that we could take this even more positively and continue the work that you've kind of initiated, we should say, through your work, and how could we kind of like take that forward and try and bridge that gap between two different faiths?
Thank you. I think that, speaking from the point of view of Catholic Shia tradition, there's been a long history of very good dialogue, much of it based in England, at Heathrop College in London, at Ampleforth, with some very, very good books written by Shia and Catholic scholars about such a dialogue. And I think the visit of the Pope to Najaf crowned that moment where he went to the city of Ali and went as a pilgrim, which is what he went to Grand Ayatollah Sistani. That was, for me, the crowning moment of all the work I've ever done, because it confirmed that the way of dialogue is the best way, despite the differences. One of the reasons we do in this college what we do, all of our students have to be fluent in Arabic. They all have to know the Quran and the Hadith. They have to know Islamic law. They have to know Islamic history, is because we believe in dialogue. But we also believe in an educated dialogue, not the sort of thing you see on the internet, people shouting at each other, but a genuinely educated dialogue. So, for example, in places like Iran, you have universities that teach all of the religions, so that Shia Muslims studying there can go out and have an informed dialogue with a partner from another faith based on a real academic foundation. So I think learning, study, that is the key, the antidote to all of our ignorance that results in so much polemical stuff. And that's why I write books. I don't write my books for Shia Muslims. They don't need a book about Fatima. They know about Fatima. I write my books for those who don't know about these extraordinary people and how they could be bridges that join people of culture and religion together. I would like Muslims to read my books, of course, but primarily the audience is people who've never heard of Al-Husayn or Karbala or Lady Zainab. Those are the people that I'm writing for and who don't have access to the sources. So dialogue is a wonderful thing. It's a hard battle, and sometimes we lose more territory than we make, but that's fine. We just keep trying, and every so often we have a great moment where we think this is really worthwhile.
Wonderful. I think everyone will join me in, sort of praising you and thanking you for the work you have done over the last few decades. So with that, actually, I will draw this seminar to a close. And I just want to, first of all, thank Professor Clohessy for his profound, beautiful talk. I benefited immensely from it. And I think I will take this notion of integrity being the pivot and axle around which all other virtues revolve, and the Husseinian praxis. I love the way you broke that down. So thank you very much, Professor Clohessy, for joining us virtually. You're a very busy man, and we really hope that you will, we could have you back again at some other time in the future as well. I also want to thank everyone for participating in the vibrant discussion. It was wonderful to hear lots of different views. And with that, thank you very much for joining us. Do follow us on all the major social media platforms. You'll get news of the next upcoming events and seminars in due course. So thank you very much once again, and we hope to see you next time. So wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Thank you, and God bless you all, and keep safe.
You too.